Up to now, we have built a simple Carnesian model that only involves or considers firms and households. During this week, we are going to add two more sectors to our model, which are the government sector and the foreign sector. Remember, when we started looking at the Canadian model, we made assumptions that there is no government involvement and there is no foreign trade. So we are going to relax those two assumptions and we allow for the government to partake in our model as well as the foreign sector. So we're going to start by looking at the government sector and then we'll come to the foreign sector. As we are looking at the government sector, there are two most important elements that we need to consider. These are government spending and taxes. As we look at these two elements, our most important focus or attention is directed towards how these two are related and most importantly how do they affect the level of aggregate spending, the multiplier and the equilibrium income. So we're going to start by looking at G, which is government spending. In South Africa, government spending has increased quite rapidly, and after the democratization, government spending been has been largely composed of social spending, mainly child support grant and social pension payments. The most important point is that government spending is essentially a political issue. In other words, government spending is related to political objectives rather than the level of income. This simply means there is no systematic relationship between government spending and the total income within the system. Therefore, as we represent government spending in our model, we are going to use the symbol G with a bar on top, where the bar indicates that government spending is autonomous with respect to the level of income. That just simply means that it is determined by other factors than other than income. Graphically, government spending is illustrated by a horizontal line. To introduce government spending into our Keynesian model, we simply add government spending to other components of aggregate spending, that is consumption spending and investment spending. And when we add government spending, that means that our aggregate spending then becomes equal to consumption spending plus investment spending plus government spending. Graphically, when we add government spending into our model, this will be illustrated by a parallel upward shift of the A curve as indicated in figure 7.2. Since government spending is autonomous, it affects the position of the curve, that is the intercept of the curve, but not the slope of the curve. And as we add government spending, what we see is that our autonomous spending will increase by the amount of government spending to A prime, which indicates a higher level of spending. The equilibrium level of income will now be at Y2, which is higher than when we only have consumers and firms in our model. Algebraically, we can also add the government sector into our Keynesian model. Still remember that the total income is equal to aggregate spending. So when we add the government expenditure into our model, then total income would then become equal to aggregate spending, where aggregate spending is now composed of three elements, which is C plus I plus G. We can as well work out this further to find out what the multiplier is, and you still have the same multiplier as we had in the previous week. The only difference is that now, instead of having autonomous expenditure as C plus I, now we have added a G in the equation. Just to offer a quick summary, as we introduce the government spending into a simple Carnesian model, we will see that the introduction of government spending will result in a higher level of aggregate spending, which also yield to a higher level of equilibrium level of income, ceteris paribus, if we compare it to the Canadian model with only firms and households. And most importantly, what we see is that as we add government spending into our model, it does not have any effect on the multiplier. Therefore, the multiplier remained unchanged. The main source of government income is taxes. Taxes are a leakage or withdrawal from the circular flow diagram. They operate in a more indirect fashion by reducing the disposable income of households so that households can afford less goods and services than they would have purchased without the effect of taxes. This then simply reflects the fact that there is a proportionate relationship or a specific relationship between the level of taxes that we are being charged by the government and our total income. This is represented by the tax rate of the income that we receive. A special or a certain proportion is taken out as part of the taxes. So to represent taxes in our Cartesian model, taxes will be equal to a smaller t multiplied by a y, which just simply reflect that taxes have a relationship or a special direct link with income. So to illustrate that more clearly, let's use a simple example. Suppose the tax rate is 0.2, then that simply means of all the income that an individual earns, 20% of that income is collected by the government as part of the tax that the individual must pay. To understand how taxes affect the equilibrium situation, we have to make a distinction between total income and disposable income. Remember, disposable income is equal to your net income minus taxes. And since we can write taxes as small t multiplied by y, we can also rewrite our disposable income as our income minus the proportion of the income that goes towards taxes, or by collecting like terms on the right hand side and write it as the disposable income is equal to 1 minus t multiplied by income. This equation just simply reflects that disposable income is equal to a fraction of total income. The introduction of taxes into our simple Cartesian model will change the slope of the curve, as it makes the multiplier effect quite smaller as compared to the multiplier effect that we would have if we had a simple model of households and firms. To illustrate that, let's use figure 7.4. and see how the introduction of taxes will alter our aggregate expenditure curve. So remember, the original consumption function is given by C, which is equal to C bar plus CY, which is indicated on the first line with a blue line. With the introduction of a proportional income tax, households cannot spend all their income. They have to first pay tax. The difference between income earned and the tax paid is disposable income. The new consumption function is lower than the previous one, except at a zero income where the tax is also zero. The consumption function therefore becomes flatter as indicated by the new consumption function, which is now equal to C bar plus C open bracket 1 minus T close bracket multiplied by Y. The slope of the aggregate spending function in our figure 4.7 are equal to the slope of the consumption function because before and after the introduction of taxes at every level of income. The introduction of taxes means that aggregate spending will be lower than the previous due to a decrease in induced consumption. This will result in a decrease in equilibrium income as reflected by Y2. Just another quick summary. The introduction of proportional tax leaves the autonomous spending unchanged, reduces the multiplier effect, as well as it does reduce the equilibrium level of income ceteris paribus. Now let's look at the combined effect of the introduction of government expenditure and taxes on the equilibrium level of income within an economic system, or in our simple Keynesian model. So let's use figure 4.5 to reflect those changes. According to figure 7.5, before we introduce the government sector into the model, our aggregate spending is indicated by A bar 1 with an equilibrium at E1, and that's a total income of Y1. When we add government spending into the simple Keynesian model, what we will see is that firstly, there is going to be a change in the intercept from A1 to A2, and this change would indicate that there is going to be a parallel upward shift in our aggregate spending expenditure curve at all levels of income, which increases the level of income from Y1 to Y2. So after we have introduced government spending to our model, what we see is that we have a new equilibrium level of income which is higher than what we had before, and that is indicated by Y2 in figure 7.5. And then when we introduce taxes into our model, or the tax rate into our model, what we see is that the tax rate will leave the intercept unchanged. However, it will influence the slope of the curve, right, by making it much smaller, which then means that the aggregate spending curve would have to swivel inwards, and as it swivels inwards, it leads to a decrease in total income, which is now indicated at Y3. Algebraically, we now have a model where our total income is now equal to aggregate expenditure, where our aggregate expenditure is now composed of consumption expenditure by household, investment by firms, as well as government expenditure by the government. Our consumption function is now composed of autonomous consumption plus C multiplied by 1 minus D multiplied by our level of income. So from the model that we have so far by adding government spending and the taxes, what we will see is that as we add government spending into our model, autonomous expenditure increases, and as we add taxes, our multiplier becomes quite smaller. As we introduce government sector into our model, we have so far noticed that the introduction of government spending increases autonomous aggregate spending and raises the equilibrium level of income, ceteris paribus. The increase in income is a multiple of the change in autonomous spending, that is, government spending has a multiplier effect on income. Government spending does not, however, affect the size of the multiplier. The introduction of a proportional income tax reduces the size of the multiplier and therefore reduces the equilibrium level of income, ceteris paribus. Such a tax affects spending and income indirectly via its effect on disposable income. Now take some time to go through the exercise in box 7.1 to practice and see the effect of the introduction of government sector into the Canadian model.